Well, thank you very much, Mandy, for that introduction. Rather long on the biography, I think, for everybody, but I do appreciate the warm welcome. And can I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and also acknowledge some other people that are in the room. Dr. Adam Thomason, the Director of the Australian Institute of Criminology. I'm not sure if Mr. Brendan Thomas is here, but I know he will be here during the course of the day. Assistant Director General, New South Wales Department of the Attorney General and Justice, and indeed from the same department, and the person who just introduced me, Mandy Young, Director Victim Support, and other distinguished guests, and everybody in the room. It's good to be here at such an important conference. The theme of today's conference, as I'm advised, is that supporting victims of crime is both apt and timely. This month is Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Month, and this week the AIC released its 2010 Facts and Figures of Australian Crime Monitoring Report. Both of these things highlight two things to me. Firstly, that having an awareness of crime and its impacts on victims and the community more broadly is an often forgotten aspect in the fight against crime. And secondly, that only by understanding the extent of the problem and the trends of crime over years can we ensure that we're putting government funds into the right programs. All of you in this room who work in the field of victim support do a remarkable job. You help victims and their families through perhaps the most traumatic experience of their life, and this benefits not only them, but our entire community. I'd like to particularly acknowledge those who have survived a serious crime and have then dedicated themselves to help other survivors. While this morning's plenary speaker, Dr. Anne O'Neill, is one such example, I know there are many other crime survivors here who are doing the same good work. How we look to assist victims, particularly through the criminal justice process, is a complex policy area. Victims don't just want sympathy, they want recognition, support and redress. Because as we all know, when a crime is committed against someone, it may be the end point for that criminal, that offender, but it can be the traumatic start of a very troubling journey for the victim and the victim's loved ones. The federal government has a range of initiatives in place, often in partnership with state and territory governments and policing agencies, to prevent crime through education and awareness. Programs such as the Think You Know initiative helps to inform young people about the inherent risks of the online environment. The National Organised Crime Response Plan focuses our jurisdictions on key national threats like money laundering, amphetamine-type stimulants and identity crime, which affect all of us in the community. And the National Youth Policing Strategy takes effective community-based intervention programs from one state and replicates them in another state, learning from each other in the best way to deal with these issues. And as the Facts and Figures report makes clear, we're having a positive effect with the overall rate of crime in Australia falling across nearly all crime types. But crime does still occur, and the onus on the governments, police services and courts is to ensure that those who suffer the effects of crime are supported. For example, at the federal level, the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecution's Witness Assistance Service, like many state-based services, provides advice and counselling to victims, as well as support in building victim impact statements and debriefing victims when legal proceedings end. It's through these sort of services that governments can help victims recover. Another example of where the government is particularly focused and where crime, and hence the number of victims, is on the rise is cybercrime. Like crime in the real world, the sort of crime that can occur in the online world is diverse, but the reaction of victims and the support that they need doesn't change. Fraud committed through the cyber world is increasing as more and more people make use of the internet because the ease it offers in our everyday lives. Like fraud committed elsewhere, people who've been adversely affected by online fraud can be embarrassed, indeed humiliated, and may feel reticent about reporting their loss to the authorities. And I can recall, some time ago now, six or so years ago, I was in Boston preparing for a speech at a bed and breakfast. Sounds rather innocuous start to an anecdote, doesn't it? And I came across a proprietor of the bed and breakfast in which I was staying, and all the breakfast guests had left. And he was a stranger to me, other than for one night I was staying there before I was to deliver a speech at Harvard. And he, apropos of nothing, confided in me that he was a victim of a Nigerian fraud scandal, which he had managed to somehow pretty much hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars to fraudsters, which was not only never recovered, but he never went to the authorities. Now, why did he raise that with me? Well, my understanding is he raised that with me because I was a stranger. He needed to tell somebody. He was an intelligent person, well educated, and relatively worldly, I got the impression. So it just did baffle me how he could have been entrapped in that situation. And so, of course, his sense of embarrassment, humiliation was intense, and he would be one of many. As to why you do those things, I guess the sophistication of those types of fraud is increasing all the time. And indeed, the capacity through the internet to send that message no longer to tens or hundreds, but thousands and tens of thousands, means that if only 0.001% respond, then of course it's still a significant number, given the capacity of using technology to reach so many people and seek to entrap them. So his life was partly ruined. I gave him probably some reassuring words, but I really didn't know what else to do. I did say to him he should get some support and report that crime, and I'm not sure whether he ever did. But it just brought home to me the downside, of which there are many upsides, but the downside to the cyber world, how it can be misused, and I guess now I'm in this particular job, I look to consider ways about how we can mitigate against such risks impacting on people in this country and beyond. A recent study undertaken by the Australian Institute of Criminology in conjunction with the Victoria Police and the University of Melbourne involved surveying a sample of potential Nigerian scam victims supplied by Victoria Police and AUSTRAC. AUSTRAC, for those who may not know, is our financial intelligence unit that tracks money and tracks it and provides reports to law enforcement agencies and governments. These victims had sent money to Nigeria in the 12-month period from the 1st of April 2007 and the 31st of March 2008. More than one-third of victims in the study had been exposed to dating relationship scams, while the remainder became victims of online transaction scams or other advance fee fraud scams. Victims reported experiences of financial hardship and emotional trauma as a result of being victimised, as well as a loss of confidence in other people. A smaller group of those victims, 12% of those, said their victimisation had caused marital or relationship problems. Many of those surveyed, like the bed and breakfast proprietor in Boston, felt too embarrassed to report the crime. Others believed that the police could do nothing to retrieve the money, or were scared of recrimination if they did report the crime. The federal government is working with the police and the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission to publicly highlight the dangers of what can be seemingly innocent emails and SMS messages, but which are really bait for the unguarded. This is part of the government's crime prevention role. We're also working hard to identify the organised crime operators who are behind these scams, to investigate and prosecute them, and this is part of the government's support and method of redress for victims. This two-pronged approach underscores the federal government's role in the criminal justice system and how it can be applied most effectively. To take a very different example of how the government is seeking to support victims, I'd like to touch briefly on domestic violence. As I said earlier, May is Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Month. The 2010 Facts and Figures report states that 49% of females who were victims of an assault were victims in their own home. That level of assault presents a cumulative challenge for justice and health professionals as the reverberations of the trauma move through the community. The Commonwealth is working with the states to improve laws to protect those at risk of domestic or family violence. An agreement was signed at the Standing Committee of Attorneys General in April this year to strengthen the rights of victims of domestic violence. This agreement commits all states and the Commonwealth to move towards a national scheme for domestic and family violence orders, and we believe this will greatly improve the level of protection for victims of domestic violence and delivers a key commitment in the Council of Australian Government's National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children 2010 to 2022. We are also developing model automatic recognition legislation to put in place information sharing to support police and courts in implementing the national scheme. This will allow victims of domestic violence to be able to travel or move to another jurisdiction and be automatically protected by their court-issued DVO without the requirement to register their DVO with a court in the other jurisdiction. Together with the Attorney-General, Robert McClelland, and the Minister for Families, Jenny Macklin, we will continue to consider options for better policy to support those who have borne the brunt of domestic violence, assault and other crimes. Research into the experiences and long-term effects for victims has a relatively brief history, becoming a formal discipline only in the 1970s. Governments and academics have learnt a lot over the past 40 years, but I have no doubt we have more to learn. The Gillard government takes its role in the criminal justice system seriously, be it helping to inform and educate the public about the risks of crime, supporting our law enforcement and intelligence agencies to investigate crime, or supporting our prosecution services to provide redress through the conviction of criminals for their offences. But it is a cyclical world. What we do to understand the extent of a crime impacts on how we respond to it. And victims having a voice in that cycle is critical to finding effective solutions and redress. So I commend this gathering. It's important in helping inform government about victims' needs and in refining the support services that victims so truly need. Thank you very much.